I remember, what's it probably been close to 10 years now. They were like, the Yukon, right? We're going up into the Yukon, which is a pretty like desolate area. I know like back in the 1800s, there was the whole, everybody's going to find gold up there too. And now they're like, oh, we're going back to the Yukon now.
Still exciting though. I can tell you why. Okay. Yeah.
So how much are people still looking for new deposits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Yukon is, the reason that's so exciting is because what they call the mother lode of the Yukon has never been found. The mother lode is basically the source of all the gold deposits like around it. They've never identified that central source, and it's up there somewhere.
All right, let's get started. Welcome to the Angel Research Podcast. My name is Jason Freert. Today on the best investing podcast ever is Luke Burgess. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks, Freert, for having me.
Yep, Luke is the editor and chief investment strategist of the Junior Mining Trader, and which you can guess by the name, talks about junior mining stocks, particularly gold, precious metals, and the like. Is that
gold,
correct?
Silver, all the precious metals, but we're also into base metals and energy metals too.
Gotcha. So let's talk about gold. It's, what's going on with gold?
So there's a lot going on with gold, particularly recently. For the past 12 months, gold has been pretty much dead, and especially during the summertime, it's sort of
I saw.
dead.
Was it early part of summer is when it was touching record highs? It was over 2,000. I think right now it's like about 2,000, or is that just earlier in the year?
It was closer to record highs in May.
Gotcha.
But it didn't. It got very close to.
Yeah, it was within like $7, I think,
at least,
something like that.
$10, something like that. But the reason gold has not been performing so well is because of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 11 times in a row to combat inflation. And as the Federal Reserve does that, it helps inflation, but it also helps support the dollar, which is bearish for gold. So we've had a lot of pressure on gold from the dollar support in the past 12 months. Back in September of last year, the dollar was on a 20-year high. So it's not. We shouldn't really expect to see super high gold prices with the U.S. dollar that high. Nevertheless, even though gold isn't like skyrocketing, it's still very close to record prices, which makes us very excited. It's right at the record prices. It could pop higher and just easily go soaring from there.
How much of the gold price right now and the gold market is dictated by supply and demand versus just the dollar and interest rates?
That's actually a very good question. It's actually very difficult to say exactly like what influences gold. At the end of the day, it obviously is supply and demand. But you're right. There's all this other speculation on like the dollar, geopolitical events, the economy. There's all kinds of things.
Right. So from a demand perspective, what could drive up a massive amount of demand?
So speculation could,
right.
Obviously.
But like just people just being scared, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm comparing it to oil, right? So oil, the demand component usually comes from people, the economy doing really well.
Yeah.
If people think that the economy is going to grow, people are going to be using, driving more transportation, like using all that products, then demand kicks up and oil prices go higher. That doesn't seem to be the case for gold. It's like, there's industrial uses, but it's more just like you said, safe haven.
Safe haven stuff.
And with all of this inflation talk, we've experienced, generational high inflation. It hasn't been, I don't think in our lifetime, been this high. Stories of, my parents who were in the 70s. Well, you're a 70s
baby. I got the stories too.
Yeah. So gold inflation hasn't been this high since when Luke Burgess was a baby, but and inflation and gold is supposedly the inflation hedge. Why haven't we seen it, at record territory?
So, well, like again, it is very near record territory.
Close.
It's very close. So the all-time record high for gold prices was set in 2020 at $2,070 an ounce, and I mean it's really at $2,000 an ounce. Man, it is so close. It got to 2060 twice in the past or since 2020. So it was 2060 in May 2023, like you mentioned, and then it was 2060 the previous year in 22 at one point. It's not that gold is underperforming or it's just not skyrocketing like people expect it to. And
I wouldn't expect it to skyrocket. It's just we've had 8-9% inflation. You know what I mean, for several years now, and gold is still it's up there. But so why? So I want my gold at $3,000 an ounce.
Me too, buddy. Listen, it's all about the dollar. Like I said, the Federal Reserve went crazy with the interest rates. The dollar was on a 20-year high, man. I mean, that's I don't know. There's no fighting that. But again, like I said, gold is very close to the record high. It is so close to it. It's not going to take much further for it to get over, and then momentum to push it higher. But to answer your question, what does push it? It will be momentum for the next several months, I think. I don't think the straight demand is going to be a huge factor. It's going to be speculation.
Is prices now, though, in a good spot for producers? So because, you talk about the sweet spot in something like oil, right? So Saudi Arabia actually just said they're extending their oil cuts till the end of September. Oil's in that $80 range. I think they like it. I think they would prefer it to be closer to $100, but they don't want it down in $50, $60 range where they can't make money, and neither do the oil companies. They don't want it super high because then the demand is going to wane. So there's kind of the sweet spot. Is there something similar for gold for certain producers where it's like, hey, look, if it's $1,500 an ounce, we can't make money. We need it at $1,800. We need it at $2,000. Or I guess that's depending on which company.
Yeah. So obviously there's a bottom, right? There's an all-in sustaining cost. You need to sell your product for more than you're producing it. But there's no top. So you're right. Like oil producers, let's say OPEC doesn't want oil at $200. Well, because that means that there's going to be these technologies that are going to replace, or they're going to work to replace oil. If gold was at $10,000, there's nobody that's going to come along to replace gold for. There's no replacement for gold.
Right. And you can store it basically. I mean, I guess you can store oil too, but gold pretty much lasts forever.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there obviously is a bottom. That's what producers call the all-in sustaining cost. And that is basically what it costs the producers to make, so they need to sell it for more for a profit. But I want to go back to your other question about what is going to push it, because you mentioned oil and demand. The difference between oil and gold is literally everyone uses oil. We all use gasoline or something like that. Very few of us actually own gold, even though we own a lot of gold jewelry. I think the estimate is about 1% to 2% of Americans are invested in gold. Whereas how many people use oil or invested in oil? There's way more people invested in oil and energy than there are gold. So it won't take that much more new investors to really put a big strain on supply.
But is there a catalyst for those new investors?
The catalyst is fear
right
now. And I think that there's a lot of things that are going to play into it right now. The Federal Reserve ending interest rate, their campaign, that's a big thing. But also this week, Fitch downgraded the U.S.'s credit rating. I feel like the market they're still digesting that as we talk about that. I actually don't know. I don't know where that's going to go, to be honest with you. But it does present risk and uncertainty, which is what gold likes.
Yeah. And I mean, how much of this demand is going to come for physical gold or people, I know central banks like to buy and store gold, just as hedges and backing stuff. So I think I read somewhere where that is close to a record high for central banks buying gold. But or is your average investor just buying like GLD, the gold ETF,
Yeah,
or like a
that's what they're buying.
gold miner?
Yeah, gold ETFs. Even though the gold ETFs do represent or supposedly represent physical backing, they're digitally traded assets.
Right.
Very few people are buying physical bullion anymore. It's too much of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, I know I'm making a lot of comparisons between gold and oil, and there's really, they're commodities, but they really are pretty different. However, several months ago, you wrote an article talking about peak gold. And I am, especially anybody who's been covering the markets and part of angel publishing for several years understands peak oil, the theory around it, and how basically, it's harder and harder to get oil. We experienced record high oil prices back in 2007, 2008, and then we had the fracking boom sort of I wouldn't say, it pretty much saved the fossil fuel industry. Because at that point, oil was harder and harder to get. We were, beholden to Saudi Arabia and what they could do in OPEC, and the whole fracking and finding all this like tight oil in North America just opened up, a tsunami here. However, there's people think that that's the last, sort of throes, and there's nothing else after that. So, how does that compare to the peak? Is peak gold the same thing? It's harder to find gold, but we're also not using gold in the same way we are oil. So what's the idea behind peak gold theory? So, is it a theory? Is this your own theory?
It's not my theory. So you're exactly right. Well, first let's talk about the differences between, because this is very important. Obviously, oil is something that you use, and it's never there anymore. It's once it's used, it's used. Gold can be recycled. In fact, it is recycled. It is one of the most recycled elements on the planet. I think something like 95% of all the gold that is mined gets recycled over and over. So that is a main difference. We could possibly run out of oil. Like, we could burn up all the fossil fuels. I don't know if we could use up all of the gold. However, the theory is very similar. As you know, man, how long have we been talking about peak oil, dude? Long time. The theory states that all oil wells follow a bell curve on production. They have an increase right in the beginning. It peaks out, and then after a while, the oil production declines. Now,
and it hits a point where it is more expensive to extract said oil from the well than it is worth selling, and so you basically just
close it up, go find
kick rocks. And so and fracking, allowed us to kind of revisit some of these old wells because and get out more oil and made it economically viable, at least when oil is at a certain price.
Yeah. So, well, just like oil, when people go out and they look for gold and they're looking for resources to exploit it, they're looking for the cheapest, most accessible, the low-hanging fruit. And in oil, that's what we saw. We saw the low-hanging fruit get mined or exploited first. Mm-hmm. Same thing with gold. Except the difference is gold has been mined for 5,000-6,000 years, whereas oil, crude oil at least, has only been used for, 100 or so. And over those centuries, the low-hanging fruit has been harder and harder to get. And we have seen in history, there have been times where we didn't think we've mined out all the gold, we can't get any more, until a technology came along and fixed that. So off the top of my head, I believe that there are two main technologies, they're not really technologies, they're really like processes. Two processes that really saved the gold industry from this peak gold. The one was back in the 1880s. It's the MacArthur Forest cyanide process. This is essentially just extracting gold from ore using cyanide, just the process of that. And the second one would be heap leaching in the 1960s. And this is something I've explained on this podcast several times before. This is just, it's both of these are just ways to process bulk ore, to process ore in bulk. But both of those technologies did the same thing that fracking did, in that it allowed us to access previously inaccessible resources that we couldn't before. So even though gold ore grades are declining, we should expect another technology to come along and help us get more gold out. So like in the ocean, for example, there's an estimated 20 million tons of gold in the ocean. But there's no technology that would allow us to economically produce it. In the future, there will be, but there's not now. And in the meantime, there are opportunities for investors to take advantage of this, the fact that we are having these lower ore grades and the higher costs associated with it.
So we're way past the old miner going into
absolutely, bro.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with the pickaxe,
yeah, and
then there's just gold. The panning for gold.
The panning that's old school.
Right.
You can still find nuggets of gold. It's called placer gold. But most of the gold today is disseminated in the rock. If you looked at a piece of gold ore, most people wouldn't be able to tell it from any other rock. The average ore grade right now is under 1.5 grams per ton. So that's 1.5 grams, tiny little bit. It's about the size of a paper clip in a ton of rock. So 2,000 pounds. It's like the size of this squared off and a paper clip inside. A way that I like to think about it is it's like a penny in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's how much rock you need to process to get that out.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's
and they still are. So
compared to 100 years ago where you could just pick up a nugget,
right,
and bite it and make sure
so
it's nice
there
and soft.
is let me digest this a little bit. How much of the production now is coming from existing sort of mines that they're using new technology, and how much of like just brand new exploration? I remember, what's it probably been close to 10 years now, they were like, the Yukon, right? We're going up into the Yukon, which is a pretty like desolate area. I know like back in the 1800s, there was the whole, everybody's going to find gold up there too. And now they're like, oh, we're going back to the Yukon now.
Still exciting though. I can tell you why.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much are people still looking for new deposits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Yukon is, the reason that's so exciting is because what they call the mother lode of the Yukon has never been found. The mother lode is basically the source of all the gold deposits like around it. They've never identified that central source, and it's up there somewhere. It's just...
So could it have been like an asteroid?
I don't think it's an asteroid.
Yeah, that's my theory. There was a huge golden asteroid that came down, and so all these deposits up there, but they think there's a source.
Yes,
that is coming from, and they can't. It's buried under 1,000 feet of ice and snow or something. Like
so
that.
It's the mother lode of this huge thing that extends.
So global warming, cooling out or melting all that ice, that could be a good thing for gold because we could find it.
Perhaps I don't.
Okay,
I don't know.
I'm going with it.
You're going to go with that.
So so they're still exploring places. How do they even like find, like, is it other people looking for oil or other areas, and they're like, oh, hey, there's gold here. Let's like sell this property to a gold explorer or gold miner. Like, are they actively looking at, I don't know, what, satellite data, or trying to, go into old mines? Like, how is it typically done?
So basically all of that.
Right.
But the most common way that somebody starts exploring a mine is somebody's explored it in the past. They couldn't get economical drill results. However, the market has changed, and now they can and they just want to they need to go back and make sure that the information is correct. A lot of these things go back like decades, so there was no regulation back then. So you need to go back and re-drill it. But that's really like how it starts off. Is usually it's an old property that somebody prospect long ago, and they are redoing it. But like there are other ways you could look for anomalies through aerial or satellite imagery. A lot of the times it's just, you see a geologist sees a mineralized rock, chips it off and has a look at it. That happens a lot like that too. But again, we're talking about very rare things, and even though it's relatively common, it's still rare in the very big picture.
Right.
You know.
So peak gold, declining ore grades. Let's talk about that for a sec. So you're basically saying, a paperclip inside of a ton of rock, and what, it's just going to get worse and worse. It's going to be a paperclip inside 2 tons of rock.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you. I guess we can pull this up. And take a look at this here. So here is the average ore grade around the world. Sorry, this is from 1835 to present. And you can see in the back here, ore grades were at one point, they were in the double digits. And now they are down to less than 1%.
And it's different per country
it's
that
different
we're looking
per country,
at.
And yeah.
So, but yeah, they're all heading down. So it's pretty much, are we digging like deeper and deeper, I guess?
Always digging deeper. But it's really part of the reason that ore grades are going down is because of the technologies allow us to produce.
Right.
It's part of that too. It's
Gotcha.
not just the fact that they are running out of these high grade resources.
Yeah. So we're relying on increased technology. It seems to be, like I said, the peak oil and fracking is always to me a good example of that. Obviously, there's other minerals and metals, and so we're relying on it. We may not necessarily. What's the technology? Is it, I don't know, bigger drills, like better drills, cheaper drills? I know AI is the hot topic now. Are we going to use artificial intelligence mixed with like drones to dig up specks of gold in places that like humans can't get to? Like, do we not even know? We're just thinking like, hey, smart people are going to come up with it. Like, what's going on with that?
So the technology that it will eventually allow us to mine resources that we can't do now is probably be another process. It'll be another process that will be able to leach gold out in a much more effective way. AI is going to help mining. That's what I want to talk about next.
Well, it helps everything in theory, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. But I don't know if our AI is at the point right now where we could say, hey, create a new process that will, make it cheaper for me to produce gold. Maybe in 50 years it can do that, but not right now.
Right.
It can barely tell me what day it is. Right.
So we're thinking it's going to be some sort of process, that allows, is that going to help aid in the exploration process or the actual extraction
process?
The actual extraction.
And it's going to be very difficult to say who is going to come up with this process. It's not going to be anybody until we have a need for it. And it's not going to be like a government. It's not going to be a private company. It'll probably be like a university.
Right. And we're specifically focused on gold. Is there other, I'm assuming each mineral sort of, because of the specific properties of that mineral needs a certain type of process. Are there any sort of other, sort of exploration techniques that translate to gold? Is gold sort of unique in that, I know so gold, one of the things that is more on the industrial metals that has been a huge demand increase is copper.
Copper,
right?
Yeah, that's what I was
going to say. Copper. Oh, we need all these electric cars. We need all of this, and we need copper to do for the batteries and to make the metals lighter? Like, is there any correlation between gold and copper? Is that its own thing?
It is absolutely its own thing, and the copper industry is having its own issue with declining ore grades.
Right.
And this AI actually is going to help with copper. In fact, BHP just signed an agreement with Microsoft back in May, or it announced that it had an agreement with Microsoft that they are going to use AI systems to help the recovery at the Escondida copper mine in South America, which is the largest copper mine in the world. But as far as AI, there are a lot of exciting developments happening in mining. I recently went to write an article about it, and I wanted to see like how is AI going to change mining, and my conclusion is it's literally going to change every aspect of mining from from looking for the new places to mine for whatever you're mining for to actually selling the finished product, like every step of the way. I think the easier question to answer is how won't AI help miners? It would be a much shorter list, at least.
That seems to be in the majority of industries that people believe that sort of technology is going to drastically transform almost every single industry.
Well, because
people usually think of the tech side, right?
You're
like,
right.
Oh,
You're
it's gonna write some stuff for me. It's gonna do some data analysis. People don't necessarily. I think. I don't know if people look at the idea of the mining industry and gold and all this as like a technology based industry, but it really is, right?
Absolutely. So the mining industry is one of the forerunners. I mean, when there's a new technology, they're one of the first industries to employ it.
After porn.
Well, I don't know. So in the 1990s, the mining industry started to experiment with like autonomous vehicles.
Right.
I don't know if porn did that in the 1990s, but yeah, they've been doing that kind of stuff for a long time. They're always looking to make things cheaper, make things safer, and in automated trucking, that is probably where we're going to see the most immediate developments in AI helping the mining
right,
industry.
because they gotta dig these big loads of rock and take them over to processing facility, and so you have. I mean, there's a trucker shortage, across the globe pretty much now. So if you can get that automated, running 24/7, that's huge. So interesting. So. The last thing I wanted to talk about, which I think we mentioned a little bit in relates, but it seems to be almost every industry is having to deal with this, is just the environmental impact of mining, right? People don't realize that everything in this room, this computer, whatever, comes from a metal that was mined out of the ground. It didn't just fall out of the sky. Well, maybe it did, but it didn't just fall out of the sky and just magically appear. It had to come from a mine that might have come from a third world country. It hopefully was mined ethically, so to speak, but probably not. So how much of the expansion, especially in, I would say, maybe in new exploration, is coming up because of the environmental concerns?
That's a really good question. When we talk about mining, we actually don't use a lot of metals relative to other stuff that we use. We use a lot of rock and sand. Rock and sand mining is probably it's the most environmentally impact because we have so much of that.
You're talking about for making concrete?
Yeah, concrete
stuff like
and
that.
roads and things like that.
Right.
I don't. We'll have to pull up what it is, but somebody has an estimate on how much of each resource every American uses per year, and it's like the rock. It's like 50 times more than any metal you can possibly think of. So I don't know how to answer that question, to be honest with you, because we're talking about like rocks and sand and
right. I guess specifically in terms of gold, like I know the geopolitical and this might not necessarily fall under the environmental concerns, but if you're in South America and, there's an indigenous land that has resources they have to negotiate with, and it even happens a lot in Canada with the First Nations stuff.
All the time.
So
in Mexico with the Ejido,
right. So I'm wondering if that could that be a catalyst for lack of supply? Is just the not in my backyard. I know there's been a push to open up more mining in the U.S. because people are actually starting to realize that, hey, we can't, if we don't get more of this stuff, we're basically fucked.
Well, Fred, I find that not in my backyard goes right out the window with enough money.
Right.
So I don't think it. I think it's about money more.
Right.
Than
so
anything.
that as the demand goes up, as the prices go up, people will. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just holding out for the money.
Yeah, it's what I imagine.
Well, it sounds like, I've talked about this a couple of times, the 60 Minutes piece on, the Lithium Valley out in California, which California is, especially recently and traditionally known as a very pro-environment type of state.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they interviewed one of the guys that was part of sort of, I wouldn't call it an indigenous, community, but it was people that were very pro-environmental. And he was like, this is a really poor area, and bringing this industry here is going to mean more jobs and more growth within the community. So, of course we want to mine for lithium or whatever. So, that's one of the, I guess, beauties of the capitalist system is at a certain point there becomes an equilibrium where people care more about, lifting themselves out of poverty than they do about, sort of environmental impact that they don't really understand.
Yeah, and honestly, it's really hard to convince somebody to say, make a sacrifice for the future. People say they want to do it, but nobody really wants to do it. So it's hard to convince people to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like, you're going to exploit this resource now, or are you not going to, and your kids are going to do it?
Right.
Or somebody else, the next guy's going to do it. You might as well do it.
All right. Well, I do know you have a report coming out soon on that digs into
the peak gold
stuff.
Yeah. So let me tell you about how we're dealing with that.
Okay.
So what we're doing is we're looking at, like I said, there are a lot of the high grade mines have been mined out, but there are still companies out there who make these rare discoveries. So I'm looking right now for high grade drill results from miners that are just overlooked. That's working out great for us right now.
So that are we talking about junior miners,
junior
small,
explorers? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're thinking is the goal there for these companies to get acquired by a big guy or actually take them to production? Both, I guess.
It's usually to get acquired, but if you can build a mine, then you want to do that. But yeah, 9 out of 10 times you just want to get bought out. You want to get onto the next mine, do it again.
Right. So these companies specifically that you're looking at are in the exploration phase. Yeah. Maybe they have a property that they're looking at and they're doing the initial assay drill results, and they're basically hoping to hit the mother lode, so to speak.
Yeah.
Are any in the Yukon?
Not on the Yukon, on the other side of Canada. So what I did was I found there's a huge company that is doing a lot of exploration up in Canada, and they're finding like super high grade stuff. So what I did was I went through all the maps and I found the companies that surround them.
Right.
And I picked out, there was a bunch of them, but like from those I picked out like 5 of the tip top, the 5 with the best drill results, with the best management, the best cash position, basically the cream of the crop of those set of high-grade miners up there.
Okay, and that report I think is coming out next week.
Very soon.
Maybe, and by the time this even comes out, maybe
it might be.
Maybe it'll be available, and we can link it in the description, and people can check it out.
All right, Muno, can we do that?
Yeah, we're gonna make it happen. Don't worry about it. All right, I think that's good. We'll wrap it up. Thanks again,
Awesome.
Luke.
Thanks for being here.
And we will see you next time on the Angel Research Podcast. Remember, like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. Follow us on YouTube. Add us to the podcast thing, and we'll make it happen. Farewell.
Take it easy.
Stay safe out there. That's my thing. Stay safe out there.